Mr. Vince Adams, who is also an executive member of the Alliance for Change. So thank you for joining us. And Comrade Ramjitan, Mr. Ramjitan, can I ask you to start off with your statement?
Thank you very much, Kathy. And thanks to members of the press for coming out on this important press conference. I have two statements, one on the Police Service Commission and the recent developments there, and the other on what we call the pernicious pattern of persecution by the PPP. I'll do the first. I'll do the first. The AFC notes with increasing worry the PPP government's stretching of the limits of legal constraint, the flouting of the Constitution, the undermining of the norms of democratic government in its recent collision course with the Police Service Commission. It was for good reason why the framers of the Constitution saw it fit to have such an independent entity as the Police Service Commission determine questions of promotions, discipline, and removal of officers of the government. It insulates the operations of that institution of law and order from political interference. What the country has seen in the past days is flagrant attempts to instruct commissioners as to how to do their jobs and who to promote. This is disgraceful conduct and another instance of the dismantling of what we have been saying are the guardrails of democracy. Additionally, what was seen is the crude, unconstitutional attempt at suspending two commissioners of the Police Service Commission when those commissioners stoically stood up to an ill-advised president. The AFC maintains that fabricated charges are never a basis for suspension of commissioners. The Constitution provides a special procedure for suspension, which clearly was never adhered to, as posited and articulated very well by the Commissioner's attorney, Mr. Selwyn Peters. The AFC asserts that once the way was made clear by the Chief Justice making a ruling in the Brutus et al. Application, the commissioners had every right and power to proceed with the performance
Recording
of their
in progress.
to promote who they thought fit and proper. Though our Attorney General, who has a penchant to hear himself, may not like it, he must appreciate that on this specific limited issue of promotion of officers as listed on the 28th of June by the Police Service Commission, these commissioners are indeed the judge, jury, and executioner on that matter. It certainly is not the president, as he outrageously submits. The AFC wishes to congratulate those officers who were duly promoted and exhort them to preserve professionalism in extremely challenging times. They must stand tall like Paul and ensure their promotions are not voided by the government in any manner whatsoever, whether by coercion or fear. If needs be, they must vindicate these promotions by court hearings. These promotions are perfectly in order, made by a PSC, which was properly constituted and cannot be countermanded by anyone, inclusive of the president. On the second statement that I have, the pernicious pattern of racialized persecution by the PDP, the statement goes thus. The Alliance for Change notes the dangerously troubling development of racialized persecution by the PPP government directed at Black people generally and those perceived to be its opponents particularly. Since coming into government in August 2020, a noticeably large number of Afro-Guyanese have borne the brunt of terminations and dismissals from state institutions with an immediate notification for vacancies in the said institutions. This is but a purging of a section of our community from employment. This displacement and replacement certainly will create a dangerous resentment. The baseless and hollow claim of Haitians being involved in human trafficking in Guyana as the reason for a visa conditionality reveals a pattern of racialized persecution of human beings from a poor CARICOM country. The recent discriminatory practice of distribution of hampers and monetary relief to the exclusion of a section of our population is well recorded. Many of those who have complained of exclusion are Afro-Guyanese. Moreover, the shamelessly unjustified prosecution of Afro-Guyanese with the sole purpose to character assassinate, vilify, and demonize does not bode well for Guyana. This continues presently at GCOM. Already, the legal consultant has suffered a forced dismissal, as was the chief accountant. The PPP should be warned that this tribal governance will jeopardize the existence of Guyana as we know it. If the PPP does not, it should take note of a seething anger that is brewing, which, aggravated by the COVID-19 and flooding, can be further exacerbated by consequential rising food prices and unemployment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ramjatan. And can I ask Dr. Vince Adams to present his statement?
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks to the media for coming out to this important press conference. I want to address here what I think it seems to be a continuation of what's pretty troubling in terms of how it affects the nations or the Guyanese people's health, safety, and health and the environment. And this here it seems to be a pattern now where almost on a daily basis, there's this callous misinformation coming from Exxon and the government, which is disappointing, that the environmental requirements are now being strengthened by this current administration compared to the past administration. And I'm not coming from this. I know we're in a political forum here, but I am not coming from this with any political agenda. I'm a scientist by nature, and I'm gonna, we don't have a whole lot of leeway for making errors. And for those of you who know me in the media, you know that I tell it like it is. The opposition has gotten their fair share of criticism from me when it was deserving. But as far as and by the way, I think I'm in as good a position as anyone to compare the environmental requirements we had before and what we currently have, since I was the director of the EPA and was building that agency into something of respectability and competence. So, I know that I have no doubts that everyone here in the media, you're good citizens and patriots. So what I'm going to present to you here is for you to judge for yourself without any bias whatsoever. You're the partial source of information to the public, and that's all that I think that I'm asking for here. So I'm going to ask you some questions here. Or I'm going to present information in a question form. Do you believe it is strengthening or is it weakening environmental requirements when all changes favorable to Exxon, none to the government, and it's not just a coincidence, none to the government, all changes that are currently being made are in favor of Exxon? Is it strengthening or is it weakening of our environmental requirements when the government modifies the permit to increase flaring at startup 30 times from 2 days that was required or was attempted to be put into the prior permit, which is 48 hours, from 2 days to 60 days. As a matter of fact, Exxon, by the way, they are on record when during the agreement signing and discussions, etc., to say that flaring will not be over 1 day, which is what's expected. And so we should not be now suffering. The people of Guyana should not be suffering because of Exxon's incompetence in not being able to carry out, which is a basic, it's a basic task, especially for a company of international stature such as Exxon. They agreed to 1 day. So this here is really a godsend for Exxon to cover up their incompetence. But here's what's even more troubling. We gave them 60 days. And if you go by the record of the Liza one, and I recall I was there, and the first 60 days, they went up as high as the maximum flaring of all the amount of gas that they produced, which is 90 million cubic feet a day. Let's take the Liza 2. Liza 2 is going to be doubling production, and the gas is directly proportional to the production rate. So you can take that up to, let's say, they might be flaring 200 million cubic feet a day. Multiply that by 60 days, you're getting to billions of cubic feet of gas. Billions of cubic feet within 60 days. Within 60 days. Then what the government did in increasing this flaring, they put out this shiny object of a $30 per ton carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, for whatever it's worth, even though to me it's irrelevant, it's if you go do the research, that number, a price for CO2 emissions, it runs more like $60 to $100 per cubic feet. On top of that, I was the one who headed the EPA. I know the capacity we had. We have no one there who would be able to even understand how to calculate CO2 equivalent. It's not just looking at the gas concentration and say, I mean the gas production, and saying, I'm going to multiply it by the cost. You've got to go in, look at the constituents of the gas, what is called global warming factors that you've got to apply. You got to determine how to apply it and when to apply it. So what's going to happen? Exxon is going to be doing their own calculation to determine how much fines they're going to be paying. Is it strengthening or weakening of the environmental requirements when the government goes against its own government exports? And I'm not talking about myself alone. I'm talking about the GGMC, the Department of Energy, and the EPA. When I was there, when we were renegotiating or not renegotiating, but reviewing the PIARA to approve the PIARA permit and the field development plan. The GGMC, the DOE, the EPA, and the consultants hired by the same government, the Canadian consultants, we had no doubts whatsoever. We were in unanimity as to what it should be. And the standard we set was the US standard of 48 hours of flaring. What happened? What happened after I left? How did we get from 2 days, that was agreed by all the government exports? Even in our meeting with Exxon, we told them this is what it shall be. Everything changed. Turner said, I know the government is bragging that somehow this 60 days is the right thing. It's I don't know how you go from 2 days of flaring to 60 days that could result in billions of cubic feet of gas flared in just 60 days to say that that's an improvement. Here's the other part of this 60 days stuff. Here's which I call it's a gimmick and a shiny object. Here's the other part. There's nothing there as far as I see where, okay, the first 60 days is free. You put this $30 per ton after the 60 days, but it doesn't say how long you can continue to flare for this $30. So you can go on forever. Well, guess what? You're not dealt with these companies, and if it's cheaper to flare than to put in equipment, the cost of maintaining and getting it right, guess what you're going to do? It's about cost. So there's no limitations on how far you go beyond the 60 days. But here's what the government is bragging about. Well, guess what? For the first time, we've got what is called this polluter pay principles. Well, they've got it totally wrong. I cannot believe that their interpretation of a polluter pay principle
is that you're allowed to pollute as long as you can pay for it.
But here's
Now,
what
does
the-
that make
here's what the
sense
government
to
is
anybody?
bragging about.
Well, if we don't
Well,
need an
guess
environmental
what?
protection
For the
agency,
first time we've
all
got
we
what
need
is
is
called this
somebody to
polluter
come
pay
in
principle.
with deep pockets to
Well,
say, here, they've got it.
it's okay for me to
totally
pollute.
right. So as long as I can pay for it. So that's the interpretation. That was never how the pay for pollute. It was developed. It was developed with the intent of, for those who pollute, you've got to pay for the cleanup. For example, if you have a spill, you got to pay for the cleanup afterward. It was never designed for paying as part of the plan to pollute. I mean, it's the most ridiculous interpretation that I hope it's just a lack of knowledge, because I don't think that anybody would deliberately decide that that somehow, they're gonna, just to produce and just to stop flaring, not to stop flaring, they're gonna do that to the people of Guyana. In the meantime, there were 14 billion cubic feet of gas flared to date. And let me repeat this again, because both Exxon, but not Exxon, because Exxon threw the government under the bus. When the government said continue to say that this 14 billion cubic feet of gas that has been flared to date, it was an allowance in the EIA. And when Exxon got and they were challenged, Exxon said, hey, you know what? I didn't know anything, but I know where to get that number from. But the government still continued to persist that this number was there. I think the media should continue to challenge the government to show them which part of the EIA that 14 billion exists. The government even took great pains, it had to be great pains, in the announcement, in the press release, which I have here. The government took great pains to say that, this is the press release to extend this to allow the 60 days that never existed. They took great pains to say, oh, guess what? This 14 billion, by the way, was an estimate again in the EIA. The continued mistruth and misinformation. Why else? What else? What? Now you tell me. Guess what reason would they have to put it in this thing where they're saying they're talking about this $30 per ton? It's to inoculate that 14 billion that was illegally flared from that $30 per ton fine. If they're really serious, this is the place to attach it to begin with. Let's apply it. You need to ask them, why aren't they applying that, starting, if they want anybody to take them serious, start applying that $30 a day or per ton to that 14 billion that was illegally flared. That's where we need to start. But here's the other biggest part. I mean, this here, I wish you could say that these things are laughable, because it's a serious matter. If you go into the Payaro, and I think it's clause 3.4, guess what? Clause 3.4 in the Payaro negates all flaring from this $30 fine. Here's what it says. It says, under special circumstances, which are allowed, so you can, under these special circumstances, coming out to the EIA, etc. There are 3 special circumstances where you're allowed to flare. One is maintenance, emergency, and startup. So here's what, on the maintenance, here's what the clause says. It says planned/unplanned maintenance and inspection on gas handling equipment and related resources. So guess what equipment allows flaring? It's the only equipment where you flare. It's the compressor, which is part of the gas handling equipment. So what they're saying here is, if the compressor is on the maintenance, as it is right now, that has been causing the flare for 18 months, if that is in disrepair or it is being repaired, it's on the maintenance, heck, we can flare. And we are not under any restrictions to flare. So that's what that clause says. So all of this fines and everything else, that clause negates everything. And the Payaro, by the way, is going to form the template for all of the others. Now here's the other thing that I noticed that is popping up. Exxon was caught in the EIA, which forms the safety limit. The EIA says the safety limit is 120,000 barrels per day. when that seal failed in the compressor, and the media, you guys did a good job in asking what was the production rate when the seal failed. Guess what it was? 130,000 barrels per day. Remember what the EIA says? The safety limit is 120. Well, I noticed they've cut back down to 120, but what I'm hearing them say now, that they're planning to raise it now to probably about 150,000 barrels per day. Well, I hope you make them understand that they've got to go back into the EIA if they're going to change that limit. The other thing is the dumping of water. You know, again, the export says that you cannot dump water into the ocean. You got to reinject it back into the reservoir, which is a standard practice. And they insisted, and then of course after I left, that was pushed aside. But here again, even the GGMC, the DOE, and the consultant said that that was going to be the position that we were taking. The government changed that. So all of those are the questions. Do those sound as if they're improving or making more stringent the environmental requirements, or is it a weakening? I think I have no doubts whatsoever that anybody with any unbiased mind would say that it's the opposite. It's definitely making the requirement, or it's worsening the requirements of the ES&H standard by a long way. And again, I'm saying this not from a political standpoint, it's factual, and I challenge anybody to come and say that that those are not the facts. So with that, Kathy, I'm going to close and wait for questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vince Adams. At this point, I'd like to entertain questions from the media. Members of the media, you know the traditional protocols. If you would identify yourself and the organization from which you come, and then pose your questions. We do have a chat, and I am monitoring it. If there's anyone that cannot pose their question, certainly feel free to do it in the chat. And yes, it's easier if you raise your hands. Let me acknowledge Adam Harris as the first question. Please go ahead, Adam. Adam, if you're hearing me, we're willing to take your question. I see your hand up. You
probably muted.
Not hearing you, Adam.
Is his mic on, or is he muted?
We're not hearing you. His mic is not showing as being muted, but I don't know why we're not hearing him. I would ask our technical person maybe to have a look at that. Okay, we'll come back to Adam, certainly. Can I ask and see, are there any other questions? I don't see any other hands up, which is strange. We had two presentations. Wendell, please go ahead.
Hi, Mrs. Hughes. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, panelists.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I got lost in the moment there, perhaps. All right. So first of all, the Sputnik vaccines. Of course, there's a whole fiasco surrounding that right now. I'd like for either of the panelists, well, with the exception of Dr. Vincent Adams, perhaps, to pronounce on that, please. And I have more questions. Just let's go with that first, please. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. Ramjitan to take that question, please.
Yeah, that has been a complete fiasco, as you know, Wendell. And till now, we have not gotten what I would regard as proper answers from any government officers or any government ministers as to the integrity of that which left Russia, went to the United Arab Emirates, then somewhere in Latin America, and then to Guyana. We haven't gotten that. We simply got something from a fellow called Alexander Chistukov, and we now understand that that Chistukov guy had no part to do with the manufacturing He is now bankrupt, and he was the one that we understand then resold to the Sheikh Al Maktoum, who, by the way, in doing our investigations, we now understand had formed a company just 1 week before he came to Guyana, had nothing ever in his background or credentials checked that he knew anything about pharmaceuticals. And so the lingering doubts as to whether indeed this batch is authentic and whether it was preserved until it arrived in Guyana is still with us. We have, as we go along, the questions that we are getting answers to are creating even murkier waters for the government. And I would be pleading with the independent media here that they start doing some work. The United Arab Emirates Registry of Companies is online. Whether indeed the Sheikh had registered his company, we are having a difficulty. Apparently, they only put in some cell number in the registry documents. These things are not transparent at all. And then, of course, with those officials out of Russia, and then one who was their associate out of Norway, Norway being, of course, a very democratic country, has him under the run, he being investigated, the Mortensen guy. Now, these are questionable, shady characters all around. And so we want answers because we know too, apart from the integrity of the vaccines, that over $688 million was overpaid. So it is a very serious matter unto now that has not been cleared by the PPP government.
Thank you. Wendell, do you have a follow-up? If not, I'll ask Adam. And if we can't hear him, I will read his question. Okay, Adam, you want to give it a try again?
Well, could you read?
Yes, sure. Adam says, my question, what is there to enforce the promotion of the officers identified by the Police Service Commission, given that the Attorney General says that the government would not acknowledge them? Who determines what happens to the officers? Would the government give them the necessary pay increases that would accompany the promotions?
Well, as I mentioned in my statement, Kathy, those are very valid promotions. And when, let's say next month, the promotions are not effectuated by virtue of the benefits, increased benefits that, let's say, one who was an assistant superintendent now promoted to superintendent, if they do not get it, one would expect that those persons, or at least one of them, can take it to court. Anil was smart enough, in inverted commas, to indicate that indeed a court order can enforce it. But I am absolutely certain that their arrogance here would mean that the president is going to tell the finance department and so on, do not pay them the increases. But in view of the fact that the PSC was properly constituted, when it made this decision, there was no injunctive order that they could not. The suspension of them was wholly unconstitutional at the ill-advised or the non-advised that the Attorney General gave the president. It means that the way was cleared for them to be promoted. So if they do not get, they can go now to the court, the High Court, and say that I was promoted by the PSC. I am not getting the benefits of my promotion. And I seek an order or a declaration that I get the benefits and the increased pay and whatever else from that new status. And I'm absolutely certain that our court will uphold that.
Thank you. I see both Wendell and Adam still have their hands up. Gentlemen, did you have a follow-up question?
I noticed
Yes.
Adam's question, if the court can dictate to the government. Of course, the court can dictate to the government. This is supposed to be a law-abiding country. And if someone goes to the court and asks the court to get the benefits of his promotion, and the court so order, the government is bound to adhere to that court order, Adam. And I am absolutely certain that if they do not do that in the face of a court ruling, then you can have serious trouble inside of that police force. And especially when the government side can argue whether the promotion was wrong. Let them go and argue that there.
Mhm.
And if they win that aspect of the argument, well, fine. The court might not want to rule. But the trouble is that the court, in my opinion, will certainly rule that it was a proper promotion with a properly constituted PSC, and everything was done in order, and the people are entitled.
Thank you. Wendell, do you have another question?
I do, Mrs. Hughes.
Please
Mr.
go ahead.
Rambutan, I hear you on your points, but there is something that is still unclear. And that is, who does the power rest with to discipline the Police Service Commission, so to speak, to either suspend or remove them in the absence of that Judicial Service Commission? Does the power revert to the president, or is that the only way that they can be disciplined or removed?
The only way that they can be removed, that is the Public Service Commissioners you're talking about here, right?
The Police Service Commission.
Yeah, the Public Service Commission is when these other institutions are in place. If there is a vacuum created, the Constitution never said that the vacuum go back to the head of the executive branch. The vacuum creates a vacuum. And we know that within this period until about the 10th of August, the Police Service Commission members' life, that is their tenure, comes to an end. So you can't go and do anything. The president can't bring a halt to their performance of their functions. And that was already ruled by a court of law in, I think, that Public Service Commissioner's case, when President Granger sought to deal with, what's his name again? I forgot his name.
Duncan.
Public Service Commission. And the court,
Duncan.
you have to get all the procedures in accordance with the Constitution. So they can't go knock off Conway and Paul Slow by virtue of the president saying so. It cannot be. And that is the legal position as is well recorded. So in the meantime, they will have to abide by the Police Service Commission's promotions. The government is bound by that.
Thank you.
Mrs. Hughes,
Yes.
I have Amal Griffith here with me, and she has a question for Dr. Adams.
Certainly, go ahead. I don't see any other hands up. Go ahead, Amel.
Good afternoon, all. My question is, what is the opposition's thought on Minister Gail Teixeira's recommitment that the PPPC administration will ensure that all Guyanese benefit from the nation's wealth? This comes in response to calls from two United States congressmen. I want to know if enough focus is being placed on ensuring that Guyanese benefit from the wealth of the oil and gas sector. Thank you.
Well, that might even be a better question for Camarade, since it's rests in economics and everything else, but also the environment has a connection to the economics. I'm all in favor, and I think every single Guyanese are in favor of oil production. And I know that there's one side of this here who are saying you should stop oil, and I've always said no, we need it. However, it has to be done properly. You cannot benefit economically if you do not have good health, if you're destroying the environment. And let me tell you, with this new administration, they are going to be zoning in, they've already started zoning in like a laser on environmental compliances to cut the effect that affects global warming or climate change. I mean, you hear the president all the time. So when they talk about the economics, they're not going to talk about economics in terms of wealth alone. They mean in terms of health, safety, and the environment, as reflected in the highest priority of the U.S. government, one of the highest priority of the president and the administration in climate change. You can see the actions that they've taken, rejoining the Paris Accord, etc. So when they speak of wealth, don't let us mistake that wealth to mean it's only about money. Again, everything that I say here has nothing to do with trying to stop production. I'm the biggest proponent of our production, and I think that's what the U.S. government wants. However, it has to be done correctly. And here's the other thing that I think the media should always challenge the government with this question: why should we allow Exxon or whoever comes into this country to operate at lower standards that they're expected to, and they have to abide with, in countries such as the United States? You know, I worked at the highest level of the U.S. government, and I know that when the government says jump, these companies say how high, but it appears to be the opposite here in Guyana. So the government should always be challenged to make sure that these companies do not operate with less rigor than they're required to do in other countries.
I want to add to Vince's answers there, and to tell the journalists and reporters here that what is also involved is how do we spend the oil monies. I think the US congressman was also getting directly to that. We created what is called a Natural Resource Fund Act, in which we have almost everything stated therein, and it was in accordance with what is called the Norwegian model, where a big portion of the money is going to go for the next generation, can only be spent in about 20 years' time, but that other portion can be spent and can only be done via a 21-member called investment committee, it is called, which is outside of the politicos like myself and Ashni and whosoever else are the politicos. And this government, when we were in office there, that is the APNU-FC coalition government, had indicated that we wanted that model because it prevents a president or a finance minister from having a command over that funding. What we have been seeing, however, is instead of that 21-member committee, which is made up of labor, business, members of the Bar Association, and so on, it is all stated therein. We see that they are now asking for what is called a change of that Natural Resource Act to go to what is called the Kazakhstan model. Now, Kazakhstan is not very well known for its democracy. And in the Kazakhstan model is two men that control the oil monies, the president and the finance minister. And so we know the president here is Bharat Jagdeo, notwithstanding Irfan Ali, and the Ashni Singh is the finance minister. So we're gonna go back to pre-2015 days. And what we also created in the Natural Resource Fund Act, and I would hope that reporters go back there to see what and the strength of that act, to see how the monies, even when it is spent by the investment committee, has to be accounted for by a special other committee called the Accountability Committee, which is even stronger. They can take Price Waterhouse officials, pay them out of the oil monies to ensure that whatever is spent is properly spent. Because we know the Auditor General might have his hands full with other state work and all of that. And that is what is the strength of that Natural Resource Act, so that a larger component of our community can get to know where it will go. And that is why up to now, this government has not operationalized it. They want to have the power via borrowings and through these allocations and appropriations in the budget so that they will spend the money. And we know how they're spending the money. The COVID relief went substantially to a set of their supporters and hardly to Afro-Guyanese, as I mentioned, in this pernicious racialized persecution by the PPP. And that is what I think that the congressman is getting at. So we have to get our people also investigating what the PPP is up to by virtue of not wanting to go into the oil funds. And at the end of this year, it might reach in the vicinity of 450 million US dollars. We have a flooding arrangement here now where they don't want to go and use that. And in the act, it says emergency like flooding. You can go and utilize it, but you got to operationalize the thing by setting up these committees. They want Ashney and Bharat and Irfan wants to control that money. And so that is why they're not touching the oil monies. That is a disastrous thing. I just wish to make that point.
Thank you. Sean, before I take your question, I have another question from Adam Harris that's related to the oil issue. And the question is, what is the status of those bits of legislations that your department created during your tenure? One had to do with penalties for irregularities. Are they still in effect or have they been rescinded? So Dr. Vince Adams, I don't know if you can handle that question, please.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question because one of the top priorities while I was there, and we did a lot. As a matter of fact, the staff would tell you that what we did in less than 2 years, we hadn't done in since the agency was created 4 years ago. But one of the things that I immediately recognized, the act, the EPA Act, which was created at inception in 1996, has never been changed. And guess what? It doesn't say a single word about oil and gas. So common sense would tell you immediately that has to become a high priority in terms of legislation to protect oil and gas, the operations of oil and gas, etc. However, and what I tell the public all the time is that not because we didn't have regulations as yet, there aren't regulations out there. There are regulations out there, and I'm getting back to my point here, and the standard that I set to the EPA for all of the regulators is that when they come in together to operate, they will not be, allowed to operate under any lesser conditions than what they have to abide with in countries such as the United States. And I always use United States as the model because that's what I'm used to. I went out there, but nevertheless, we were still moving forward to change, to modify our act. So I went out there, I added 2 attorneys to the staff, one specifically assigned to rewriting the act. And guess what? My understanding is as soon as I left, that was thrown on the back burner. They said, I heard that they said that was necessary, etc. So as far as that's concerned, as far as I know anyway, that's what has happened to the foundation, what should have been the foundation for rewriting that act to accommodate oil and gas. The next thing that I did, we were making technical decisions that had really no technical basis. We had no procedures. So what I did, I established guidelines since you had to wait a whole, it would probably take years to get an actual parliament, etc. You can establish guidelines. So when I left there, I think I had like 17 guidelines in draft that you can use while you're waiting for completion of the revision of that. I don't know what has happened to those guidelines. So I guess you would have to ask the EPA, how is it handling these guidelines? Now, the other thing is, as you folks may recall, when I arrived there, I was the first person that ever took anybody that even had imposed any fines on people who were violating their environment. We collected several millions of dollars in fine, and one of those was Exxon, who violated the laws of the land 6 times. I allowed them a pass for the first 3 times, and guess what they did? They promised to fix it. They violated their own procedure and the law. They decided they were going to oppose it. They decided they weren't going to pay a measly $500 in fine. They said no, they refused. Guess what? We decided to take them to court. And as soon as I left, I understand again, this is just information that I received. Maybe the media ought to ask the government. I understand that case was dropped against Exxon. So Adam, in answer to your question, it appears as if Exxon continues to get the better deal of until now. I have not seen in any case where things have been changed, where it's been changed in the favor of the government. Everything is in favor of Exxon. Here's another one. Exxon declares, and this here is counter to this statement by the United States government, that every single citizen must enjoy the wealth that oil brings forth. During the, when I was there, during again the prior discussions with the other agencies, not me alone, so don't, I don't want anybody to say this is a Vincent Adams thing. The GGMC was there, DOE, the consultant side by that government, and Exxon said that, well, it's okay for them to flare because Guyana is a carbon sink. So we've got a capacity to absorb. In the meantime now, they've committed, by the corporation has committed to cut back on flaring and pollutants from flaring by 45% in the rest of the world. So who are we? It's okay for us to continue to increase our pollutants, our citizens, it doesn't matter. We can go and get all kinds of, health effects, but, they've got to be obligated to the laws of the other country. But here's what's most troubling. It's just about, 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, I heard the same exact thing coming from the government. The government would support, is now using that language, that hell, we are a pristine environment, etc. So we've got the capacity. So those are the kinds of things why, I intend to remain involved, because, and the other thing, because when you got the GGMC, the DOE, etc. Let me tell you, those professionals, and I could understand why they're afraid to come out and speak their minds. They can't, because of obvious reasons. So, I'm happy that I'm in a position where I can speak publicly, educate the people, even the government, if they're willing to accept what I'm telling them, because I'm not saying this with any political agenda or any political bias. It's science. And if you can tell me what I'm saying is not factual, I would like to know it. But don't just say here, that's misinformation, because that's what they come back and say. Well, tell the media should challenge them and tell me specifically, okay, this is what Dr. Adams is saying. Tell me specifically, point me to some reference where he's incorrect. So to get back to your question, Adam, so that's just some of the examples that I used there to give you a status as to where the legislation is.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Now, Sean from News Talk Radio, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. To Mr. Kemraj Ramjatan, two U.S. Congress person came out speaking to the government about governance issues, some of which you address. We heard our own governance minister saying that the opposition will be engaged, she staunchly represents this, that the opposition will be engaged when they recognize the government. We know that President Ali had said this. What is the posture now of the AFC or the AP and UFC coalition going forward with such a stance, the government not willing to engage the opposition on governance and other issues to resolve some of these situations that are taking place in the country? What then now will be your next move? Because we're seeing a defiance really from outside pressures.
Kathy, you would like to answer that too?
I thought you were in a better position.
No, well, look, there is no doubt that since we have already become sworn parliamentarians, we are members as in the opposition. We have filed litigation in the court. That inherently means that the government of the day, installed or not, is the government of the day. We have a question mark over them because we feel that a humongous amount of votes in the East Coast had problems. 4,800 people who are not in the country voted, and that was because of shenanigans done by the PPP. Whatever it is, We do not have to go and, to the PPP arrogance and start bowing down and say, we respect you as the government of the day. By nature of the implication and that which we are by conduct doing, they are in government. So why do they not want to engage? What do we have to now go and say? That they were not installed? Well, we are not going to do that. And if that is what Irfan Ali and Jagdeo and those guys want, we are not going to do that, because we feel, and we have every right to so feel, that there were problems with that last elections. The PPP side only want to talk about their narrative, but we have a narrative too, and we have evidence of it, because there was a recount, and the recount found so many things, none of which were considered when they were installed, although the agreement as per that arrangement that the CARICOM and so on brokered indicated that all of this must be considered. So we are not going to lessen our worth by doing any declarations that will, make them feel happy. We are in opposition. And once you know that you are the opposition, that you're going to expose, you're going to oppose, and you're going to even try to depose, as Churchill would say, we are going to do just that. So if they do not want us to engage, they want to provoke all kinds of civil strife, because it's always in the interest of the PPP to see action in the street, which they then, what you call video, and they will then go and show their supporters. And then because of certain arithmetics of this situation in Ghana, they are going to feel that will make them happy. But just engage us. How many times we haven't met in Parliament with the ministers? How many times we haven't questioned them? So this additional piece of wanting us to recognize them is a lot of trash talk on the part of Gail Teixeira. And we're not going to do that. They're an installed government.
If I could add, at the end of the day, I think we have to remember that according to the GCOM figures, which as a coalition, we question the integrity of that data. According to those numbers, 217,000 persons approximately voted for the coalition. Roughly, that equates to about 49% of the population.
That's right.
And therefore, at the end of the day, we have every right to be part of the management and governance of Guyana.
That's right.
I think we forget that, a very important point. The other thing is that our Constitution, Article 13, talks about an inclusionary democracy. And if the Constitution is the main document by which we abide with, and we have these talks about democracy and fulfilling the tenets of the Constitution, then certainly 49% of the country has a right to participate, because the country is theirs also. It doesn't belong only to the PPP. And therefore, when you talk about an inclusionary democracy, we can already see that in close to 11 months, there has been a deliberate attempt to void that aspect of our Constitution, because the opposition has been deliberately excluded from choosing their representatives on the state boards, on so many of those other organizations. Everybody knows the history of what has transpired within the last 11 months. And I want to remind everyone and the public and the media that Mr. Barack Jagdeo, on many occasions after 2015, stated that he was not going to endorse or accept the coalition government. Go back, all we got to do Google, and it's right that there. He was not and nonetheless, we realize that the bigger person, a proper leader, will understand that you have to govern in the interest of all the parties. And 49% is too big a number to exclude. I think we will leave it there, and Sean had another question. Sean,
Yes,
do
thank
you
you.
have another question?
Sure. Are we going to see the coalition pressing the government for, which is constitutionally required, with respect to the confirmation of the Chancellor of the Judiciary, the Chief Justice, and a police commissioner?
Certainly, Sean. We have already made it quite clear that both Ms. Cummings and George be made respectively Chancellor and Chief Justice, substantive. And the government of the day had promised that they are going to do that. They've gotten into government, a year has passed almost, well, not a year, but there it is, it hasn't happened. We indicated that indeed too, that there should be the naming of a commissioner. And we certainly, if we were in government, we would have named a commissioner already. But it does appear from all that is transpiring and the recent developments and the fiasco and the debacle that is happening at the upper echelons of the police force, it seems that the government wants to name a certain person who might not be supported by the Police Service Commission. And that is why they wanted to knock off, because under our constitution, although it's a presidential appointment, the president acts after consultation with two institutions primarily, the Police Service Commission, and they don't want to get the recommendation of that commission as headed by Paul Slow. So they're gonna wait out, or they're gonna suspend unconstitutionally as they've done. But the other institution is the Ghana Police Association, which is provided for under the Police Act. That is also an institution that governs the body. It's not a trade union as such, because you don't have trade unionism in the police force, but it is an association. And that association also is another association that the president must have meaningful consultation with. And we know that is why you had two elections, because there is a certain set of people there on that very first elections that was not going to do the favorite of the president, support the favorite. So they call back another elections and hold another thing so, dictatorially and so undemocratically. And so we already would have named our commissioner, as a matter of fact. So we are going to press hard that these two institutions be consulted and the naming of the commissioner is done. But I'm certain that the president is going to halt it until such time as he gets his way.
Thank you, Kemraj. I think we have another question from Wendell Badri.
Yes, I do have another question. Mr. Ramjajan, I am not sure whether you're in possession of this information, but there are concerns. Some people who have approached me would like to know what is the statistics regarding persons who have died after taking the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Do you have that information?
No, we do not have that information. I can say that we do have every week a running report from our Shadow Minister of Health, Karen Cummings. She collates her material from the Ministry of Health and some other places independent of the ministry. And we really don't have, at least from the last report that I heard from her, that kind of information. But if you do, please, you can communicate with me and Kathy. I would want to take up finding out and scrutinizing whether it's accurate or not.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up. I think that was our last question. I would like to thank Mr. Kemraj Ramjatan and Dr. Vince Adams for your contributions this afternoon. And I would like to thank the media for participating. And in closing, I encourage you to be safe, to support and promote the tenets of safety that we require at this very difficult COVID time. So take care and be safe, and thank you to everyone.
Thank you too, and stay safe.
Thank you.